I have no idea what I'm doing. Everything I've ever made, including this video right now, I'm just winging it. And it's not because I haven't done it before. I've made lots of things. But that often makes it harder, making me think I know how it's done, when really the new thing that I'm creating right now is trying to tell me how it really wants to be done. A funny thing happens when you release something and it starts to get more views than you could have ever imagined. When I released the Night Sky, Goodbye Night Sky video, episode 1, I was expecting maybe 1,000 views in the first month. It seemed reasonable. I wasn't sure if it was a topic that would really resonate with people. In other words, I don't know how many people in the world still really cherish the night sky in that special way that I do. Of course, there's astronomers and astrophysicists and people who clearly make their life around the night and around the night sky. So of course they would be interested, but how many common people, how many normal folks? And it's completely blown my mind how many people have come to watch and comment and tell me their story of either, I live in a city, I always have, and I've never seen a night sky like these. And then there's the other hand of, I moved to a Bortle Class 3 night sky place because it makes me so happy to see the night sky that it's worth it. It's worth living in a rural area away from the city. And the noise. And it feels really gratifying because this film took an insanely long amount of time. And it's continuing to take a long amount of time. I am currently working on episode 2, but this first episode and the whole sort of writing of it and building of the story and getting the footage, it's taken well over a year to do all that. I thought this was going to be a simple question, and the cookie crumbles in really crazy ways. I don't know, I just am continually mind blown by all the little facets of this question and where it's taking me. But for now, and for this video, I want to show you some of the nightmarish, incredible stuff that I cooked up for the episode. This is very technical, but remember that as an artist, it doesn't matter what you do technically. It's about the story that you tell. So I think it's time that we go to the cutting room, to the computer, to the editing software. So I'm gonna start with this shot right here. This was shot by my best friend Karlie on the peak of Sierra Buttes in the Tahoe National Forest. It was quite the epic camping trip in which my car broke down on the way back. But that's a story for another time. The camera, my Canon 7D Mark I, has been in our family since about 2010. And many a photo shoot and road trip has been captured using it. It's an awesome photo and time-lapse camera, but the video quality falls short of today's camera standards, specifically when it comes to dynamic range. Dynamic range is the difference between the highest values in an image and the lowest values in an image. What do I mean by that? Well, for example, you see over here, it's like really white in the image. It's really blown out. My shirt here is also kind of blown out. You can't see detail in this part of the image and in this part of the image. What would be really nice is if we could see both. If we could see highlights, we could see the blue sky, and we could see detail in the shadows. And that's kind of what you get with really expensive cameras. But what do you do if you don't have one, like me? One thing you can do is sky replacement and relighting with color grading. So let me just show you what I mean. So this is actually what the introduction chat of me on top of the mountain looked like before any work was done on it. It's super, super, super blown out in the low end and in the high end. So you can't really see the sky, which is kind of sad. And you can't see any detail really in the rocks. These beautiful pink flowers are not really apparent at all. How do we get this to eventually look like this, which I think is a lot better because you can see the blue sky, you can see details in the rocks, the pink flowers are popping out. How do we do that? Well, in this case, what I did was I started by color grading. The first thing that I did is flatten the image. So I just basically cranked the gamma wheel way up. What that does is it brings those high values that are blown out and those low values that are blown out, and it brings them kind of to the same level, just a little bit brighter or darker than one another. So that's kind of helpful, but it's a terrible image. It looks awful, right? If I play this back, like there's noise suddenly becoming visible. So that's why we go to noise reduction. So I turn on some noise reduction and suddenly it's starting to look a little bit better. Noise reduction is in this tab, by the way. What this is doing is it's looking at the past 3 frames saying, what is the noise between all these frames? And then it's trying to reduce that exact noise in this image and in the current frame. Although the noise reduction helps us with noise, it also softens the image significantly. Like if you look at this, which is pre-noise reduction, compared to this, like that's a lot softer. In fact, like my face starts looking a bit weird, almost like it's a deep fake or something. So that's why the next node here is called sharpen. And what I'm doing here is let me turn that on. Whoa, that's a big difference, right? What I'm doing here is going to this blur and sharpen page and just sharpening the image just a smidgen. And I'm also going here to the color wheels page and decreasing the midtone detail ever so slightly. Because if I don't do that, then it just looks crispy and it looks over sharpened. But if I return that to what it was, it's just a little bit of a help to make the sharpen look less sharpened. It's like this push and pull between artificial sharpening that looks wrong and a crisper image that kind of works well in a 4K timeline. And then somewhat counterintuitively, I'm adding grain next. So let me turn that on. Now you can't really see that well when I'm zoomed out, but if you zoom in, if I turn that grain on, it's just like, oh, but I thought we just did noise reduction. Why are we adding grain again? Well, the reason that I'm adding grain is because it makes these soft edges, these like sort of sharpened but kind of strange, soft, blurred look a little bit crispier, even though I don't do anything to the sharpening. It makes it look a little bit more like it was filmed on film, like on some good camera, basically. And this is still kind of like a lot better. It's a lot sharper. It's a lot cleaner, but it's super flat. So the next thing that I'm doing here is adding contrast. And that just like brings it back to where it was before, essentially, in terms of contrast. But now these shadows have a lot of detail in them and they don't have noise. And these highlights are still blown out, but at least you can see all the parts of the image that you couldn't see before. I mean, this is before, and this is where we are now. So that's pretty cool. Now this could be the final image, basically. I mean, I could scroll through this and sort of get a feel for it, but, you know, and it feels like morning, which is nice. But the one thing that I didn't like about this image is that it was making me look at the sky, it was making me look at the hills, and that's great. It's a beautiful landscape. But like I need to be the center of attention, of course. I'm the storyteller, and I'm introducing you to the story, and I needed a little bit more attention on me, which is maybe self-centered, but I think hopefully you'll agree that the final product is a little bit easier to know where your eye wants to go, rather than like looking all around the shot, like, you know, where am I? So if I turn on this node, which is called a vignette, I'm just putting a little bit of darken, a little bit of shadow, and a little bit of desaturation and blur. And then here, I actually tracked my face. I drew a power window or a circle around my face. You can see this power window just follows me around, basically. I was having this frustrating feeling that my face was darker than the rest of the frame, and I think it legitimately was because of the way that I organized these nodes. So this node just kind of brings it back to maybe what it should have been in the first place. And that is the final shot, or it could be, except that I was sort of really dissatisfied with this blown out sky. So one of the tricks of post-production is sky replacement. If you don't like the way that the sky looks in your shot, usually you can just replace it. So how do we do that? Well, let's swap over to After Effects. In After Effects, we can see the final shot, but how did we get here? So if I go to this comp, you can see that what I've done is I've made the highlights in the shot transparent using this tool called Extract, which is basically like a Luma keyer, at least in this upper half of the shot. So I can go way down and then it's like I'm a ghost and the rocks are disappearing and weird stuff. But then if I just find the sweet spot, you'll see that the hills come back just the right amount. There's a little bit of sky, but not like the blown out sky that I don't want. And there we have it. That's the final shot. No, it's not the final shot. I don't want checkerboard in the sky. So in this comp here, all I'm doing is taking this previous shot that you see in the video, this time lapse, which was taken with the same camera, but instead of a 1080p, it was taken in images, in a bunch of raw images at 6K, basically. And I'm underlaying that. I'm underlaying that underneath the image of me talking. So again, this is just the video portion of the frame, and this is the still image portion of the frame, and I'm just putting that underneath this one. So there we go. We've got a beautiful sky. That's kind of cool, right? So that's one way that you can make your bad camera look a little bit better. And I hope that's useful. This all goes a long way to make this shot feel on par with this shot. Feel like it naturally comes next. But what if you don't just have bad equipment, you have broken equipment? A few months ago, I was messing around on the weekend, and I accidentally knocked my 50mm lens, which I've had since, I think, probably 2011. I knocked it off the desk, and it fell down like this onto the ground and snapped in two. And at first I was like really bummed about this. And it sat on my desk for a little while as just sort of the sad reminder that I need to go spend some money and buy another 50mm. But then I started looking at it and playing around with it, and I noticed something. I noticed that if you just put your eye up to the lens, it kind of looks cool. It's sort of like a magnifying glass, but then if you flip it around, it's like a concave lens. It's like a super fisheye. That's pretty fun. I started thinking, what if I could use this? And I took this other half of the lens. You know, this one's really like super macro. You can't really see it, but you'll see it in this shot. This shot is actually shot using the broken half of a 50mm lens. I took my phone and I put my phone up to the glass here. There we go. And you can start to see that if you do it carefully, you can get a nice, super macro close-up. Put my phone up like this. I went into the bathroom to get lighting and to get a mirror. But how did I get the stars there? Is maybe the question you're asking. So the original video was actually this. There's a weird sort of like circle around because I'm just filming it through this lens. What I did next is a little bit of color correction, just to boost the gamma, similar effect to what we did earlier, right? Get that contrast decrease, bring up the shadows, bring down the highlights. And then I added this in-eye comp. Now this in-eye comp is actually a sphere. It's a sphere, a VC Orb, Video Copilot Orb plugin, that is using camera data that I tracked to my eyeball. So I tricked After Effects into thinking that my eyeball was the world and that the camera was stationary. And then I used that camera information to wrap an image of the night sky over it, positioning it all correctly and then getting to this. And now this looks terrible. You still can't really see what's going on, right? There's a lot of color correction going on here. But if I turn on this next adjustment layer, which is a Lumetri color panel, and it's literally just so I can use the color temperature. Decrease the color temperature, make it a little cooler looking. Suddenly it starts to look like I'm outside and it's nighttime and I'm looking at the night sky. Then I added a vignette to sort of darken these super duper highlights, very similar to the previous shot. And finally, this is the vignette for the top right. And that's literally it. And that looks like really convincing. I've had some people tell me that they thought it was just filmed and they were like, how did you capture that? I don't know if you think that. I mean, for the film buffs out there and the photographers, you're probably like, oh, that's really nice VFX, not really nice cinematography. But anyhow, I'm very glad about how this came out. It almost even looks like this bathroom light is the moon, which is kind of fun. So when you break your equipment, like I did, my gears always start turning about, how can I use this? Should I fix it? Would that be a learning experience? I mean, there's a lot of cool stuff in here. Now you might be asking yourself, like, sure, okay, Johnny, how do I get really nice archival footage of exactly the thing that I'm trying to tell a story about without paying like $1 billion gajillion dollars for it? If you don't know, archival footage is generally really expensive. Literally hundreds of dollars minimum and dozens of dollars per second of runtime. So I was really struggling with this and trying to find footage for this part in the video. You know, when we're talking about Thomas Edison and all of his inventors, buddies, basically, you know, trying to get a sense of what life was like when electricity was invented. So again, I kind of turned to the mentality of like, if you can't buy the footage, make the footage as much as you can. So I found this footage of old-timey New York. This is New York just basically in 1911, right after electrification of the city. This stuff is public domain footage, which is why it's actually fully rights free. So I can do whatever I want to it and publish it anywhere that I want. You can publish it anywhere that you want. There's some awesome shots here. Really like surreal, strange look back in history. But what you might notice is that some of these shots look nothing like the one that I ended up putting in the video. For instance, this one, this bridge right here, right? I added lights to every single one of these shots. I made them look like they're at nighttime, and then I added lights to all of it. So let's jump into that After Effects project and figure out some of the tricks of making that work. So the first step that I did here is I flattened the image. Very similar process to before. I always like to bring in as much dynamic range into the midtones as possible so that I can really see what I'm working with and play around and massage it a little bit better. I added some grain, added a vignette, some glow, and then of course, got to make it look like nighttime. So tinting it a tiny bit blue and crunching the curves quite a bit. So there we go. Looks kind of like nighttime, but doesn't look like nighttime because there's no lights. So then we turn the Brooklyn Bridge glow lights on. Not bad. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Okay, let's add more. So I think I duplicated it and then I moved it back in 3D space. So it looked like, the other span of the bridge had some lights on it. And then this is where stuff starts to get nuts. These are all lens flares, lens flare effects. Let me turn this on and you can see there's a bunch of lights now on the bridge. These are all lens flares that are set to a very small brightness, and they're tinted orange or yellow. And if I turn on this next one, you see it just keeps going down the bridge and down the bridge. And as we move across the shot, you'll see that, now it stops. So more street lamps down the bridge. I remember looking at some reference images, and the real bridge wasn't lit like this, but, if it sells the effect, it sells the effect. So I turn on these ones, which is more lens flares that make the bridge look like it's illuminated. And then, oh my, how did I do that? What the heck is going on here? So this is literally just a big rectangle that is orange. And what I've done is just mask out a bunch of little triangles that fade out, that have a gradient on them. There's a gradient that goes from this orange color to sort of a grayish color. That on its own kind of sells the whole shot. And then gotta add some sky glow, because that's what lights do at night to the sky. One of the things I kept running into that was kind of frustrating is there's a lot of compression artifacts throughout the image, like these weird blocky looking things. And I was kind of frustrated by that, but there literally was nothing that I could do to bring detail back. I mean, I could run it through a neural network to clean up the image and get rid of some of those compression artifacts, but we'll talk about that later. And then just a little bit more like light pollution. You see it's the lights presumably on the bridge are illuminating the bridge span here. So that's what that layer does. And then just keep going up the layers. Let's see, what is this? Manhattan and Brooklyn. Oh, these are just trackers. So this is the Manhattan Bridge up front, and this is the Brooklyn Bridge in the back. So everything, this is just to get the position of where to put things. And then because this boat kind of like crosses in front of the bridge, we kind of have to take care of that. So I just rotoscoped, meaning just masked around, drew a little path around the boat. And if I solo that, you can see as the boat moves through the frame, we just sort of kind of cover up. When the boat passes in front of the lights, they don't shine through, which is cool. And I think that's a sort of subconscious thing that we really do notice as humans. So now we turn on this vignette, which is just kind of like an orange adjustment layer that's set to screen transfer mode, meaning that it's just gonna kind of make all of the image a little bit more orange and a little sepia, I guess, essentially. And I believe it's not even a vignette. That's funny. This shouldn't be called vignette. It should be called orangey. Excellent. We fixed it. So that's just one of these shots. There was a couple of other ones, like for instance, this shot, which is actually the first shot that you see of the old-timey section. So again, the original looked like this. It's shot during the middle of the day. None of these lights are on. Similar kind of techniques as the previous shot. We do a little bit of sky replacement as well. We make the street lights glow. Ta-da! In this one, I just literally masked out every single street light, drew a circle around it, and made it glow. Not bad. A little bit of lens blur, sells it. One thing that I did throughout these shots was I took this footage of an AI colorizer program going through and guessing what the colors are. It kind of like guesses like, this horse is probably brownish and white there, and this building is probably sort of brick colored. What's bad about these shots is that they all kind of like share the exact same colors. It's all sort of just this muddy old film, and then there's like color bleed and stuff. But if you just add it on top of a pre-existing clip like this, just a little bit, like not even that much, like 25%, it really just makes the colors seem a lot more realistic. This shot is probably the one that took the most time, because there's so many lights. And you see it for only like 5 seconds in the final video, which makes me kind of sad. But you see like all of these curtains? These are literally all done manually. Just nuts. Just pure ridiculousness. Look at that. Ugh. It makes me sad just looking at this to think about all the hours that I spent on this. But it also makes me really excited because I think it turned out amazing. And most people didn't even notice. They just assumed, oh yeah, that's old-time footage. Look at all those lights. Wow. One last thing I wanted to share about this sort of old-timey electric light section is this one very specific image that I put in there very deliberately. And that is this image right here. This is a very, very low resolution, awful quality image of the Edison pioneers getting together to celebrate Thomas Edison's birthday. And Thomas Edison's actually here in the image. The reason that I find this image significant is because it's one of the only images that exists that shows that part of the group of white men basically inventing the light bulb was this guy, Latimer, a black man. And in that time, in the early 1900s, late 1800s, for a black man to be on the crew of an engineering team is a big deal historically. This man must have had a hell of a time to work on this team and not be just completely prejudiced against. But I mean, he wrote the patents. He literally drafted the patents for the light bulbs and invented the carbon filament. But this image is terrible, right? It's awful. I would feel so sad if I had to show this to somebody at 4K resolution. There's these compression artifacts. It's just awful. So what I did is I ran that image through an artificial intelligence or a neural network that does upscaling. So essentially the idea is make the image larger without losing detail and cleaning it up at the same time. So I played around with this and did a bunch of different upscaling techniques and tried blurring the image before upscaling it, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually I also colorized the image, also using an artificial intelligence algorithm. And you can see it actually was smart enough to realize that Latimer's skin color was a darker pigment than the other people in the room, which is pretty awesome. Eventually I went with one of the images that was the most blurred because, you know, it's colored, it's relatively upscaled, it looks okay, and you can see the skin color of everybody in the room. Now, when all is said and done, these are some techniques to spice up, to add color and depth to images and make your archival images look a lot better. But at the end of the day, of course, story is everything when it comes to filmmaking or art in general. And it doesn't really matter how many fancy visuals I put in this video. I think as long as it had the core of what I was trying to say and what I was trying to feel in making this video, I think it works. I think it's fine. I think that's the point in the first place. So I still have no clue what I'm doing, but I think that's okay. I think that's a good thing. Every time that I've ever started a creative project and I'm like, oh yeah, I know how this works. I'm just gonna do it like I did it before. It never works because every creative project speaks to you differently and has a different heart and a different core, and you're a different person when you're doing it. And by the way, I don't even think that just goes for the arts. I think it goes for science and other intellectual disciplines. Good ideas don't come from constructed, deliberate thought. I think it bubbles up from the unconscious. The only question is, are we listening to what's bubbling up from our unconscious, our hunches? If I knew what I was doing, I wouldn't be listening to those voices, and I wouldn't be listening to the heart of what I'm trying to create and discover. So yeah, I have no idea what I'm doing, and so can you.